The last part of this module is going to focus on something called a metabolic pathway. And this is kind of linking together lots of endergonic and exergonic reactions, all catalyzed by enzymes to achieve a kind of grander or larger function for the cell as a whole. So when we talk about a cell's or an organism's metabolism, what we are referring to is all of the chemical reactions happening inside that cell or organism at any given time. A metabolic pathway is a series of coordinated enzyme catalyzed reactions. So here is a very short metabolic pathway. We start with A, and ultimately we want D. In order to get there, we first have to make B with one reaction, C with another, and then finally we make D with a third enzyme catalyzed reaction. So each of these reactions can be individually classified as exergonic or endergonic, but this total pathway from A to D is a metabolic pathway. When we talk about metabolic pathways, we can classify them into one of two categories. There are catabolic reactions and anabolic reactions. Catabolic reactions, C, will break down larger molecules or cut them into pieces, whereas metabolic pathways will take smaller pieces and build them into larger molecules. So this is different from exergonic versus endergonic, although it's similar. But here we're talking about a series of chemical reactions, metabolic pathway, and not a single reaction. So an anabolic pathway takes lots of smaller pieces, brings them together. We reduce entropy, reduce disorder, and therefore this is going to require energy. Whereas catabolic reactions take a larger molecule and break them down into smaller ones, and this is ultimately going to release energy. But again, this is a series of multiple reactions. So an anabolic pathway could include multiple exergonic steps, and a catabolic pathway could include multiple endergonic steps. But if you look at our starting point and our ending point, that's going to tell you whether or not it is catabolic or anabolic. If we are taking smaller pieces, building them into larger pieces, it's anabolic. If we're taking larger pieces, breaking them into smaller pieces, it is catabolic. And this is why understanding how enzyme function is regulated is so important, because each of these metabolic pathways is made up of a series of enzyme catalyzed reactions. And each reaction can be, in stopping one reaction, can stop the whole metabolic pathway. Here's an example of a metabolic pathway that starts with the amino acid threonine and transforms it into the amino acid isoleucine. Okay, and there are 5 enzyme catalyzed steps here. We start with threonine, then we make A, that turns into B, turns into C, turns into D, until we finally get isoleucine. And isoleucine acts as an allosteric inhibitor of this very first enzyme, enzyme 1. So when isoleucine is binding enzyme 1, enzyme 1 can't bind threonine. And so we don't get any of these reactions, because if we can't do this first one, then we don't get intermediate A, so we can't do the second one, we don't get B, and so on and so on. And so we don't make more isoleucine. This is a process called feedback inhibition, and it is a really smart design for the cell, because when there's lots of isoleucine, we are stopping this from happening. And that's good, because if we already have lots of isoleucine, we don't want to make more isoleucine. When there is not lots of isoleucine, this enzyme is free, and therefore it can bind threonine, and we can make more isoleucine. This is a really important concept to understand. Feedback inhibition, it's how a cell is able to properly manage its resources and stay in a state of homeostasis where it is happy and functioning optimally. And the metabolic pathways we've looked at here are very simple, but in reality, metabolic pathways are much more complex, and they are often interacting with each other. So this scary looking figure here is breaking down all of the different metabolic pathways in a cell, and each color is related to a specific like physiological process in the cell. Each dot here is a different intermediate. Each line is a different enzyme catalyzed reaction. And you can see that they're all sort of interacting, and it is very complex. We're not going to deep dive into metabolic pathways too much, but this just gives you an idea of like how much there is to learn about cell metabolism. What we are going to focus on moving forward is one specific metabolic pathway, which is cellular respiration. So plants get light energy from the sun, and through the process of photosynthesis, they transform that into chemical energy, for example, glucose. Our cells, animal cells, can take glucose and through the process of cellular respiration, break it down into lots and lots of energy in the form of ATP. And we're going to talk about that process in Module 6.